10 seconds and pushes his pawn to 1d4. Magnus responds with knight f6. And what will Artemiev do? He goes c4. So we are going to have a very classical opening on the board, it seems. No London systems or no Trompowskis or anything of that sort. c4, and now Artemiev has a choice. He sort of goes back to his chair. He can play knight c3 and allow the Nimzo, but he goes knight to f3. And Magnus instantly goes bishop b4 check. You can see Magnus moving pretty quickly out of the opening. He generally likes to take time, but in this case, he sees that his opponent is taking time and he has been thinking about his decisions in Artemiev's time. Bishop d2 played, and now Magnus captures on d2. And queen takes is the correct way to go, because now you have an option to develop your knight on c3, which would not have been possible if you had taken on d2 with the knight. Magnus plays very classically right in the center with d5. And one of the things that White can argue that he's playing for an edge here is that Black's bishop on c8 is not very good. You see, all the pawns are on light squares, while after e3 or g3, White's bishop on f1 would be much better. But that's the problem you face when you play Queen's Gambit declined with Black. And once this problem of this bishop is solved, Black should be fine. Magnus castles. And it must be mentioned that Magnus has played this opening before many times. In fact, he played it very recently at the Sinkfield Cup as well with Levon Aronian, with the black pieces, and he plays this when he wants to have a very solid position. He doesn't want to try and push too much, which is the case here because he's leading by 1 full point. Now look at Artemiev. He puts his rook on c1. He doesn't develop his bishop because he wants Magnus to take, which he does, and now he can develop his bishop in one move. So if he had played bishop e2, then he would have had to waste that tempo. Magnus strikes in the center with c5, and next up, he would want to put his knight on c6. Artemiev castles. In the game that we had mentioned with Aronian, the game had gone dc5, rook d8, queen e2, queen c5, and so on, and it was a draw. Here, Magnus takes on d4. White is slightly better because all his pieces are developed, and now knight takes makes a lot of sense. You don't want to go into an isolated queen pawn position here by taking with the pawn on d4. So he's taken with the knight. And now for Magnus is an important moment, because if he goes knight c6, then after knight takes c6, b takes c6, this is a very weak pawn. You never want to play that way. You may want to go rook d8, that is one way, but then the queen has a nice square on e2, so he goes bishop d7. Now, he's solving the problem of his problem piece. He's going to play knight c6, and if you take, he wants to take back with the bishop. Artemiev now puts his bishop back on e2, and perhaps the idea is to put his bishop on f3. If he got this move and he could play directly bishop f3, White would be better. But it's Magnus's move, and he goes knight to c6. And now if bishop f3, then he can maybe decide to take on d4. So let's see what Artemiev does. He plays his bishop to f3. You know, sometimes you have to play openings like this as Black and just equalize and draw the game. This is what Magnus wants to do. It's no rocket science here, no big novelties, nothing. Just simple, solid play. Queen d4. Now, some things to solve here. b7 is hanging. And if you play moves like rook b8, then a7 could hang. So, a little bit of issues here. But Magnus goes rook d8. And his point is that if you take bishop takes b7, he'll play bishop c6, unleashing an attack here and here. That's the reason why Artemiev plays his queen to c4, and now he's threatening to take the pawn on d7. So what should Magnus do? Well, rook c8. Once the rook is off this diagonal, he can even play b6. So queen e2 here. And now do you go b6, or why not just exchange the bishop with c6? Bishop c6 there. Magnus has 12 minutes on the clock, and there you have bishop c6. and Artemiev has just 4 minutes. Rook f to d1 played. And Magnus looks very calm right now, and Artemiev has taken a lot of time. He's taken 11 minutes to reach here. Bishop takes f3, takes with the queen. And how should Magnus continue? One idea can be to just play b6. The other one could be to play queen b4, and he does it. And now he's putting pressure on b2 point. Not that it cannot be defended, but it's slightly tricky. He must come back with the queen, and he does so. Queen e2, defending b2. It just feels like a draw offer is somewhere in the air. You know, someone will offer a draw. g6, just taking away all back rank issues, and also at some point you can play your king to g7, which would be a nice useful move to make. And Artemiev also does the same. He plays h3, and there you have Magnus king g7. Magnus is a master of making little improving moves. You know, g6 king g7 came to him so naturally. Rook c2. So I guess what Artemiev wants to do is go rook d2 and trade the rooks down the d file. But before he can do that, Magnus exchanges on d1. Queen takes d1. Well, you have to be slightly careful here about what you want to do as black. One idea can be queen c5, and he does it. He wants to pin the knight here from moving, and maybe then go knight e4 if possible. So rook c1 played. And queen to e5 on the board. Because if you went knight e4 here, it is a possible move, but then there is knight e2, defending this and attacking here. So queen e5 played by Magnus, and queen b3 by Artemiev. Slightly putting pressure there. Look at Artemiev's time. He has less than 2 minutes on the clock. b6 by Magnus. And somewhere Artemiev's time could motivate Magnus to play on. Because when your opponent is low on time, he can make a mistake. Now rook d1 here. A good move can be h5, h4, trying to clamp down space. Also rook c5 can be an idea here. What is Magnus planning to do? He has 10 more minutes than his opponent. He goes knight to e4, presses the clock, but look at the bar. It's just gone up. And now notice the expressions of the players. Has Artemiev noticed that it's a big blunder or not? Not yet. You just don't see it. He takes a pawn in his hand. And look at that. He just saw it. And look at Magnus's expressions. He has seen that it's a blunder. Guys, f4 is coming up. Look at Artemiev just zoning in. Magnus trying to keep a poker face because he doesn't want to reveal. But there was a small expression on his face there where he said, oh my god, I've blundered. Oh my god, what have I done? And Artemiev goes f4, and look at Magnus. He sees that that's a huge mistake and smiles there because it was such an equal position. From there, the world champion just can't believe what he has done. He's just so unhappy. All ranges of emotions on his face. f4. Now if the queen goes to f5, there is g4. And Magnus is so upset because he generally doesn't blunder like this. This is a blunder of a complete piece. And there he goes back in his chair. What an unfortunate move. Knight e4 there by the world champion. And there's nothing to be done. He goes queen f5, and Artemiev instantly goes g4. Rook takes c3. But after the smoke is cleared, rook b3, ab3, Artemiev is an exchange up. Yes, Magnus has one pawn, but the white rook is super active, and Artemiev just knows what he wants to play. He's just double checking here. Rook d7, rook moves to the 7th rank, attacks the a7 pawn, and it's all over. There's nothing much to play for because the rook is just so active. He's going to clean up both these pawns, and then the b pawn will start running down the board. Magnus Carlsen shaking his head there. There's not much that the world champion can do here. He just has to play a few more moves. He can also resign here with a clear conscience. But what a turnaround in this tournament, because Magnus had 1 full point lead before the start of this round, and now with this loss, Artemiev will catch up with him. Rook a7, attacking the a6 pawn. Whew, that's the look of a man who is very, very upset there. Well, this game is a great example that even the best of players make the simplest of blunders. Artemiev knows that he has the game in the bag. Magnus goes knight to d6, but okay, now just take on a6, knight c8. Maybe just rook a8, kick the knight away. Yes, he does that. And now rook, what does he do? Rook d8, and Magnus resigns. Artemiev says sorry. Magnus says, well, that's fine.